Hello and welcome to the 12 Months to Marathon podcast with me, John Hill, the running podcast for the over 35s with Marathon Dreams. Episode 34, warming up and cooling down. What's going on with me at the moment? Right, well, I am closely coming to the end of week 14 of marathon training as I record this, so we'll be heading into tapering for the next 2 weeks. I'll do a podcast on tapering a bit later on. Of course, that's an ongoing thing, tapering, because of course you'll hit it in different stages depending on where you are in your marathon training cycle. So that's me. So I can tell that I'm due a rest because I'm starting to get a little bit sore, a little bit tired, and I need to basically just sharpen up on a few things before we get to race day. What I wanted to do with you today was I wanted to talk about warming up and cooling down, because it's one of those things where you talk about jokes, or pun intended, running jokes. One of the things about runners is stretching and how important is stretching and warming up. And it's a very hot topic, a very widely discussed topic in the running community. And I've been doing a little bit of research recently on numerous things just to sharpen up myself, really, to see how I can help people better and improve what I do and improve my coaching and my content. And what I'm starting to realise from speaking to people and researching is that it depends when it comes to warming up and cooling down, very much sometimes on the individual. So let's start off with just some principles. So first and foremost, if you have seen a physio about a condition that you have, usually they will give you some warm-ups and cool-downs, right? Now, the physio that I use, I've mentioned him before, his name's Gary, he's Physio 206, he's up here in Worcestershire. He's in a place called Bromsgrove in Worcestershire, so if you're in the West Midlands or you've got access to that and you want to go and see a brilliant physio, you can go and see him. He's Physio 206. And when I had my niggles, then Gary would give me stretches to do and give me warm-ups specifically to do. So that's a nice easy one. If you've had that given to you, then you should be doing them, particularly if it's a good private physio who's giving you that. That's something you should definitely do. If you haven't and you're just considering certain things, or you're thinking about, should I be warming up, should I be cooling down? So my experience of fitness in general is that it always depends on the type of exercise you're going to do in respect of particularly warming up. Okay, so let's cover warming up first. So most people that listen to me are recreational runners, consistent runners, potentially looking to run their first marathon. I'm not usually dealing with anybody who's looking to go into the upper echelons, as it were, of particularly marathon performance. And I would class anybody looking for, and again, you can feel free to fire me out of a cannon for saying this, but I think when you're getting less than 4 hours and you're getting close to 3:30, I think we're then starting to get into relatively pacey marathons for the type of people that I'm speaking to. And then if you get faster than that, then you've really got to look after yourself and you've really got to be conscious. So if you're a recreational runner, it stands a very good chance that you potentially have got a fairly sedentary job. Most runners tend to be sedentary, to be honest. That's what happens. So office work or whatever it might be. So if you are a sedentary person in your normal quote-unquote life and then go and run, then potentially warming up does become a bit more important, because you're literally going from cold to hot, if that makes sense. So if you're sat down all day, then a very quick mobility warm-up would be a very good idea. Okay, so here's how to think about the key principles of warming up from my experience, yeah? You don't have to spend a lot of time doing it. For me, it's more about getting some bang for your buck, okay? So body weight exercises, and I'll caveat that and give you a bit of background. I have been a personal trainer in my previous life, one-to-one, but I was always mobile, and I've run and do run group fitness programs, and I always use body weight. I never use equipment. There's reasons why. It's not whether that's good or bad or whatever, it's just the way I prefer to do things. And with body weight exercise, I think you can actually give yourself, put yourself in a really good position in terms of warming up, and it doesn't have to be excessively complicated. So let me give you an example. If you did 10 forward lunges, 5 on each leg, 10 reverse lunges, 5 on each leg, 10 body weight squats, that's going to be most than most people do to warm up, yeah? Now, whether or not that's enough comes back to this depends question. Yeah, because what we're going to do there is, if you do those exercises, you are working a lot of muscles. And for me, that's the key with any sort of mobility warm. It's how many muscles are you working? Because you could go to town with a 30-minute mobility thing, getting yourself ready for it. But it's ultimately time for one, are you going to do it for two? Because where I come from for this is a practical element. So if you do follow me on Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon, don't forget to follow me over there. One of my videos that I've pinned to my profile is the can't be bothered to warm up, which is basically 10 leg swings on each leg and then 15 bodyweight squats. Now, for most runners, if they just did that, they'd probably be okay, because most injuries, as we've talked about before, are caused by lack of strength, they're caused by inflammation, and they're also caused by overuse, really. So doing a quick mobility warm-up, I think, is a good idea, particularly if you sat down all day. Now, if you've just walked the dog and got back and then go for a run and start off fairly slow, potentially your muscles are already warm, aren't they? So you might be okay. Do you see what I'm saying there? So it's about applying some common sense to this. But I genuinely think that if you're just going for a normal run, like a training run, then doing some very basic mobility warm-ups, I think, is probably more important than doing stretching afterwards, okay? Because I'll come to stretching in a second. I think most people go from cold to hot, so that mobility is not only good physically, it's also good psychologically. So literally, I know people like definitives and they like, this is the way and you must do it this way, and that's part of the problem with a lot of things, I think. But for me, nice and simple, if you just did 10 bodyweight squats, 10 forward lunges, 10 reverse lunges, and then maybe some leg swings, 10 each leg, not going too far in the range of motion so you pull your hamstrings out, you'll probably be okay for a fairly basic run. Because let's be honest, even if you're doing a tempo run, or even if you're doing a interval session, you're going to have a warm-up part of that anyway, like a light jog or something like that, which again will get you into the mindset. Now, I read a book many years ago, which I think... The Primal Blueprint by Mark Sisson, and he talked about a fantastically simple concept of, we evolved from creatures that wouldn't warm up or cool down. If you need to get away from something, you would run. So, do you see what I mean? But the caveat to that is that, well, these creatures were probably very mobile. They weren't sitting down all day. So if you are sitting down all day, I highly recommend that you do a mobility warm-up. And again, feel free to follow a very, very simple one, which would be literally just some bodyweight squats, some forward lunges, some reverse lunges, and a couple of leg swings, 10 of each of those, and you'll be good to go, with a light jog maybe to start you off. If you're doing pace work, it's a different conversation, because I would recommend a more thorough warm-up for that. And if I'm racing, I will do a pretty thorough warm-up. And then make sure that you just keep yourself nice and warm by just doing certain movements. So Google is your friend here, YouTube is your friend here. If you can, literally you could warm yourself up, I think, from what I've just said there in a minute. If you did 10 of those lunges, 10 of all the lunges, 10 squats and some leg swings, it's a minute of your time. And you never know what that might prevent injury-wise. Okay, so next one. Stretching. Now, this is an interesting one, stretching, because there's varying thoughts on this. Please feel free to refer back to my previous point about physios, but stretching's a tricky one, because there's differing studies and differing evidence on stretching, which I've researched and read on how impactful it actually is. So in my experience, and from what people I've spoken to and what I know, the first thing to bear in mind is that stretching, static stretching, so after your run, isn't going to stop you getting sore. Okay, that's not what it does. And it's not for that, and there's hardly any evidence to back up that it would help with soreness. So if you're the type of person who is just doing general fitness or running, stretching is not going to help with soreness. Okay, that's not what helps with that. There are other things that help with that. There is evidence to say that it can improve overall flexibility. Okay, so flexibility of your muscles. So does it prevent injury? That again is questionable from the research that I've been doing recently and in the past. It's very questionable whether it actually prevents injury, but it will correlate to improved performance in terms of flexibility, whether that's a thing that you're looking for. Now, I was having a conversation recently on a podcast I was being interviewed on, and the question I always get asked is, what stretches would you do? So I think that most runners, usually struggle with, and this is muscular, not joint, they usually struggle with something in the back, if that makes sense. So it's usually a hamstring or a calf, it's something like that. So, or a hip thing, right? So stretching your hips, stretching your hamstrings and stretching your calves might be the best way to go, because that's what I tend to find. Now again, this is not if you're running fast or you're an athlete or you're performing at that level, but what tends to happen is most runners get injuries with stuff that comes from the back. What I've noticed, correlation, it's very rarely that a runner will get like a quad tear or anything like that. So yeah, I would always think about stretching in the terms of it's going to potentially help with flexibility, but it's perhaps not got as a profound impact as some people make out. Yeah, and it goes back to again what I was saying previously. If you sit down all day, get up, run, come back, sit down or lie down, then potentially doing that stretching might be a good idea after the run. Also, an interesting thing that I've recently come across, which I've not thought about, is the time in which you stretch. So most people would stretch when they first come back, but apparently, as I've been reading and researching recently, that you might need to leave a bit of time after a particularly long run to stretch to let the muscles settle down a little bit. And you certainly shouldn't stretch with an injury because that can make it worse. Like one thing I've definitely got from physios is the fact that if you're injured, stretching again won't help because the problem isn't stretching, if that makes sense. So if you don't currently warm up and cool down, you're in the majority, I would say, when it comes to runners. But I think it's about doing some research and understanding how it's going to benefit you. So what I want you to do for this today is take away some key principles. First principle I want you to take away is that it depends on your outside of running life. You know, do you sit down all day? Are you sedentaries? That sort of thing. Then a mobility warm-up might be a lot more important. If you're a fairly active person anyway, you're walking around a lot for your job or whatever it might be, then potentially a detailed mobility warm-up might not be needed at all, but might not be needed at any great length. Okay. I don't think a quick mobility warm-up is ever going to do you any harm, if I'm honest, unless you do something silly. So if you just do the very basic exercises that I mentioned there, I don't think that's going to ever cause you any harm. Okay. So yeah, getting yourself ready psychologically is a good idea, and of course, then starting your run slowly. And then I would always look at mobility-wise, bang for your buck, so big muscles. Make sure you're using big muscle groups and you're doing things that work a lot of muscles in one go, so you're saving time. A squat's a good example, a lunge is another one. These are going to use a lot of muscles, yeah, and they're going to tick a lot of boxes. So they're really good ways of doing it. And just 10 on each leg is not really going to wipe you out because you're going to warm up anyway. Stretching, like I said, is a tricky one, and I would certainly do some research and look into it because it can vary in terms of its effectiveness. Will it do you any harm? As a recreational runner, probably not, I don't think, if you're just doing a basic stretch. And if you go to 12 Months to Marathon and follow me, you'll see my can't be bothered to stretch on there, which for me is just a couple of hip flexor stretches and a couple of hamstring stretches there, which is what I do because of the fact that I've had issues with my hamstring and my hips as well. So I just make sure I do those. So a lot of this is led by information say from a physio, any conditions that you might be aware of, but it's also led by your day-to-day as well. If you are the sort of person that literally goes to sitting down again after running, then stretching within a period of time from running might be a good idea. Okay. Now again, I'm not going to give you definitives here because it depends on the person that we're talking to, but there's just hopefully some key principles to take away regarding mobility and stretching. Do your research, find things out yourself, and as always, just be a little bit careful. Just be a little bit careful that you don't do something that's brand new and you're introducing something in potentially that's going to hinder you. But I think a couple of light mobility warm-ups and a couple of light stretches after a run for most recreational runners is not going to do you any harm at all. But you've just got to make sure you do them right, and you've got to make sure you get your form right. And again, Google and YouTube is your friend here. So hopefully that helps you in terms of principle led. Again, it depends on the individual. If you've got any questions at all, feel free to drop me a message on Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon. I appreciate that. If you want, again, more detailed resources, then you can apply for my 12 Months to Marathon Plus. Sign up for my 12 Months to Marathon Plus. You don't need to apply. There's no need. It's only $7 a month. You're welcome to it. Then all you can do in the show notes, there is the link to that. You can subscribe over there for $7 a month, and there's more detailed content in there to help you with your running. It's close to some of the stuff that I give my coaching clients for a fraction of the price. You can get that over there. And then, of course, if you do want to talk about any sort of coaching at all, just drop me a message on Instagram, 12 Months to Marathon. I'll be happy to help. So thank you very much for listening. As always, I do appreciate it. As always, don't forget to like and share this podcast. It really helps me, particularly the likes and the reviews on Spotify are incredibly useful. So if you can take a few seconds out of your day to do that, that would really, really help me, and I'd appreciate it. As always, thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you all very soon indeed.